Do you know of anyone afflicted with the condition of poverty? Or worse yet, are you struggling with poverty? You would think that by this time and age, we, as a human race, would have moved past the condition of poverty. As I ready to present this next book to the channel, I sat in quiet contemplation and realized that while there may be a dictionary definition for poverty, its definition can be personally subjective. And I believe, whatever form it takes, it should be eradicated at the core. Welcome, I am Daisy, your hostess. I am bringing to you the book titled The Conquest of Poverty by Helen Wilmans. In her later years, she made it a point to share how she was able to live a life of opulence, after living a life of struggle and poverty, that is. And she layered the book with experiences from her life, and as I read through it, it appears that she just plain got to that point where enough was enough. And in that breaking point came the epiphany that a conviction held strong enough in mind, backed by perseverance and action, drizzled with faith, is an unconquerable formula. And this formula is what she will share with us, without having to say, if I can overcome my challenges, if you apply this to your life, you can overcome yours. Pretty much it feels like that's one of the things that she was saying as well. Now let me add that in my contemplation, I considered my own life, and also the recent books I've shared with you, especially as we go back to some of those oldest recorded writings of the human race, such as the Epic of Atrahasis, which is here in the channel. That is an ancient Mesopotamian epic poem written during the Old Babylonian period around 1626 BCE or thereabouts. Some of you may agree with me that many things declared as myth pale in comparison to some of the headline news of our times. And I've come to learn that within poetry, ancient literature, and songs are hidden truths available for those with eyes to see and ears to hear. So the story of Atrahasis recounts events believed to take place in the primordial pre-flood era, telling of the creation of humanity and subsequently a great flood. And if you pay attention closely, it addresses the consequences of poverty, particularly as a result of divine punishment, and also reflects a society with rigid class structures where lower class people, the Igigi gods, and by extension the human laborers, suffered immense hardships. How much different is that from today? And how many years from 1626 BC to 26 AD is that? And a most paramount question yet, how does anyone begin to etch at the collective consciousness embedded into the human psyche that poverty is not a birthright and that anyone can rise above it? It's been happening so long you think that, hey, this is how things are, this is how it is for me. How do you remove that mindset? I'll leave you with that question, and I do look forward to your comments. And with that, I now turn the page. The Conquest of Poverty by Helen Wilmans. Introduction. In writing this book, while I shall not make it an autobiography, I shall prove what I say as I go along by the test of personal experience, than which there is no better guide or teacher. I shall expound as best as I can the laws of individual financial success in the light of the philosophy of mind. While reading it, I request each reader to note, first, the steady but slow unfoldment of selfhood, as I gradually recognize more and more of its powers after catching the first faint glimpse and began unconsciously to hinder less and less the law of aspiration. Second, I ask each to note how much more rapid has been my advancement since I arrived at the plane of conscious growth, where I came to understand of its laws. Again, it will be of profit to observe that I am not indebted to environment or so-called special gifts. What I have accomplished thus far has been in obedience to the working of natural laws which can and will operate in any human organism that will tear down the embankments of fear which obstruct the river of growth and open the floodgates of courage and self-trust, thus permitting natural law to take its course. What I am natural law has made me, aided only by self-recognition, and while I know the scope of my growth and power to be boundless, what I claim for myself, I claim for each individual of the race. I do not forget that in their ignorance of not the equality, but the unity of the race, selfish men have foolishly secured the enactment of statutory laws which help to effectually hold the masses of the people in chains. But I assert that any individual may, by himself, rise above his environments, and that as he rises by virtue of his knowledge of the higher law, he helps to make clearer the mental atmosphere himself, comes into a clear and yet clearer recognition of his true relations to society and his fellow men, and thereby helps forward the coming of the time when all men shall know for a truth that, while equality in all things is neither possible nor desirable, the unity of all is at all times absolute, and that to do to others as we would have them to do to us is the practical and the only practical road to such financial success as brings with it the happiness of which we are all seeking. The Conquest of Poverty, Chapter 1. In Bondage. One of the darkest clouds that oppresses the divinely illuminated and universal hope of the race is poverty. And poverty is born of two misconceptions. First, man does not know that opulence is universal, awaiting only the opening of his own mentality to give of itself freely in every manner of uses and luxuries. And second, that he has not the faintest conception of his own power to command it. That poverty is innate in man, I am convinced by my own experience. It manifests itself first in fear. Fear is at the bottom of all poverty. Fear of others and distrust of self, which is another form of fear, and the most deadly form of all. I am convinced that every shade and degree of opulence demands upon a man's valuation of his own powers. Opulence is not limited. It is we who are limited in our demand for it, and more especially in our expectation of it after we have sent out some feeble, half-fledged demand. I have known poverty most thoroughly. I was held in a belief of its power all through the earlier part of my life, not during my childhood, however, but beginning when I was a very young woman and continuing until I found there was a law that could command opulence, which by slow degrees I put in operation and became free. In looking back upon my experience, it does not seem that the hard work I had to do wore on my strength so bitterly as the feelings engendered by the situation. I was crushed. I looked up to others as my superiors and was ready to take my place beneath them. This is always a pitiful thing, and a thing that leads constantly downward in the scale of being. Its effect upon one's womanhood or manhood is as demoralizing as the disintegration effect of alcohol on the moral character of the inebriate. Nor was this all. I was tortured day and night by fear of actual want. Where the next dollar was to come from was my continual thought. It was the last thing in my thought at night. It haunted my dreams, and in the mornings made dark and dreadful by the same gaunt phantom, I would be awakened by becoming gradually conscious of a weight at my heart. Arising and sitting on the side of my bed, the day would face me with threats that I had no courage to meet. 1,000 times in my weakness and inability to resist the present, my tears would fall all the minutes I was hastening to clothe myself. The weight at my heart was not imaginary. It was a palpable thing and did not entirely disappear for years after I began to conquer poverty and was on the upgrade of the splendid success. There was no valid reason for all this torture except that which existed in my mind. I had been so unappreciated that I had come to regard myself as an inferior creature and to look upon all successful persons as being more happily endowed by nature than I. I accepted this as an actual fact and did not reason upon it. Indeed, it was the unawakened condition of the power within me that was responsible for the whole situation. Fear was at the bottom of it all. a natural timidity that my education increased instead of overcoming, and the constant distrust of myself, my own powers, these two conditions shut out the light of life for me and left me in the dark and the cold where the sunshine of truth was slow in reaching me. But at last my reasoning powers showed signs of awakening, first on the subject of religion, then on other things, and my mind broke its fetters so that I began to see light. I threw off 100 beliefs that were considered essential to man's salvation, and as I kept on reasoning, and my reason justified me in clinging fast to my opinions, I slowly acquired a measure of individuality that enabled me to stand alone. No, not alone, but to approach the place in the understanding of myself where I saw that it would be possible for me to stand alone sometime. My tears abated as I gradually perceived within myself a will that I argued would not be there unless it was meant for use. Previous to this, I had supposed this will, when I caught sight of it at long intervals, was the devil, and stood as the living opponent to God's will, which I tried strenuously to follow by crushing my own will. But I shall not follow the course of reasoning I adopted at this period of my growth. It did pull me through every difficulty and changed me from the most despondent, hopeless, poverty-stricken person to the most hopeful and opulent one I know in all the world. I will give you the course of reasoning I followed later on in this book, but now I will continue with my experiences, all of which constitute a perfect illustration of the ideas I mean to show forth as having the power in every instance, without fail, to cure poverty and establish wealth. I consider that person wealthy who has enough and who spends fearlessly what he has. This is my condition, and while since I came to the plane of conscious growth, I have expended money for anything I desired, it has come to me in greater abundance than the amount necessary to satisfy all immediate desires. The natural result being accumulation, which, to me, represents the overplus of strength. I would not be afraid to spend the last dollar I possess in property or money, for I know that more would come to me. I know that a certain mental attitude, a certain quality of thought generated by the brain will put me in the way of getting what I want. Having mastered this quality of thought and come understandingly into the use of it, the supply is bound to be equal to my demand. To describe the mental attitude or the quality of thought may prove rather difficult since it rests on a deep understanding of man and his powers. Perhaps I had better let my further experience demonstrate the idea, and after that give the necessary explanation. I may have to go into this experience at a tiresome length, but if the reader learns the secret from it, he will be repaid for the reading. Chapter 2. The First Step Toward Freedom. I was a farmer's wife and held up my end of the work without flinching, but we lost money each year and the place was mortgaged and finally sold for debt. Perhaps there never was a more favorable situation for me than when I stood out on the roadside after years of toil on that farm, with all my possessions in a valise, waiting for a wagon to come along that would carry me to town 5 miles away. I did not suspect its being a favorable situation then. I had not a cent of money and no visible prospects ahead. It was strange that I had mustered sufficient courage to make the move I was then making. I was going to San Francisco, some 90 miles away. I lived in a mountainous region of Lake County, California. I was not only going there, but I intended to find work more congenial than the work that I had been doing so unceasingly for 20 years and more. I cannot tell how I dared undertake such a trip, except that it was an unconscious obedience to the law of aspiration. I knew almost nothing about a city, and what little I did know made me still more timid concerning it. But I was so tired of life on the plain I had been living that I voluntarily closed the door on it forever, even if starvation were the result. As I look back now, I can see how for years I had been gradually coming out of the crushed feeling that rendered me so helpless, as far as facing the world was concerned. And yet the world was a great terror to me even then. My heart sank whenever I thought of being among the happy, busy, independent, prosperous people of the city. They seemed so fortunate and so easy in their minds. They had homes and plenty. Truly, I was a haggard in the desert, an outcast. And yet I would go on. I had not then become aware of the strength that now wells up every moment in my breast and makes me laugh at the discouragements. It was no doubt there, and held me to my purpose, in spite of my not seeing it. It was entirely undeveloped so far as my consciousness was concerned, but it had begun to grow within me, and even this small prophecy of its coming power held to my purpose. It proved to be a great triumph to me that I dared to go under the circumstances, and it marked a turning point in my life from the weakness that comes from self-depreciation to the power that results from a high individual valuation. When I reached the nearest village, which was Lower Lake, 5 miles from our mountain ranch, a place where everyone knew me, I tried to borrow $10 to pay my traveling expenses to San Francisco. I asked one friend and another, only to be refused. Some of them did not have the money. Others who could have obliged me were afraid to do so. The people were all poor except a few merchants, and as we were in debt to them, I did not dare apply for a loan. I ran over the streets of that wretched little town until 9 o'clock that night. Then I bethought myself of the one hope left me. The village shoemaker had his shop and dwelling house under the same roof. From the street I saw a light in their rooms, and I rapped at the door. Both the man and his wife were startled. I presumed that I was awfully pale, and I know that I was more resolute than I had ever been in my life before. I believe to this day that I frightened those people out of that $10. I told them that I had asked dozens of people who professed friendship for me to let me have it, and everyone refused. You, I said, are the last hope I have, and it is a good hope, for I know you are going to lend it to me. I am leaving home for the city where I shall find something besides a slave's work, and I shall pay you back very soon. I did not say much more than this. The man shambled off to another room and came back with the money. He died of softening of the brain some 2 years later. I hope my night attack on his coffers was not the means of bringing it on. I would not like to be responsible for the death of one who did me a kindness. But truly, there was something strange about it. If I had thought of him at all in the morning, when I started in my quest for money, I should have put him down as the one most unlikely to let me have it. No, I am sure that he did not let me have it. I took it by mental force. Until I paid him several weeks later, the circumstance scarcely left my mind an hour. The next morning, I was on the stage under full sail for the city. Oh, the glory of the thing! The exhilaration of that ride over the mountains, the splendor of the sunshine, the beauty of the trees and flowers, the gorges so far below the road, and the streams of crystal water cascading through them. I had been over the same road several times before, but never in the same frame of mind. There had been an awakening in my brain which brought on beauties in the air and sky and water never previously noted. It was evident that I was more alive than usual. It was the beginning of my becoming acquainted with myself. I had never sought strength in myself. I had sought it in religion, in the advice of other persons, in books that were supposed to do good to those who read them. Such means of grace profited me nothing. In fact, the more I depended on them, the weaker and more irresolute I became. But at last I was conscious of a small amount of resolution, even though the possession of it filled me with anxiety. I kept asking myself how I dared leave home, where I had food and clothes at least, to venture out into the wilderness of the world's ways without either money or friends. At first the answer seemed clear enough. It was to the effect that I had been measuring myself with other people and had reached the conclusion that I was as clear-headed as anybody else, and that, therefore, my chances of making a living outside of the drudgery of farm work were good. As I neared the city, having spent 7 out of my $10, I began to sink in my own estimation, and as I did, so many chances of success shrank too. Now, note the correlation of thought and external things, as expressed in the situation just described. Thought, when positive, is all-compelling. But when negative, it has no power, either on the body or on external things. My thoughts weakened as the day waned. So when night came and I shudderingly walked the brilliant streets of the gay city, I was the most utterly hopeless creature that ever faced such a dismal situation. I went to a lodging house where I paid $1 for a room and had less than $2 left. The next morning, I began to search for a room to live in. I found one in the cockloft of a house kept by 2 older sisters and a brother. It was a decent room, and I became very happy in it later on. I paid $1.50 in advance for it and had almost nothing left. Up to this time, I had brought nothing to eat. There were some crackers and remnants of a lunch in my satchel, put up in Lower Lake by a kind neighbor with whom I had spent the night, and these lasted a day or two. Then I went without anything for 3 full days. All this time, I was haunting the newspaper offices. I wanted some literary work to do. I had no special reason for believing myself fitted by nature or education for this kind of work, but all my aspirations had pointed toward literature from my babyhood, and now I could not consent to do any other kind of work. Matters really came to a life and death contest before I found a place where I could earn a living with my pen, but I clung to the hope and would be appeased by nothing else. I had wealthy relatives in the city, but I kept away from them. I read the wants in the papers when a paper chanced to fall in my way, and I knew that I could get a situation and large wages as either cook or housekeeper in some of the exceedingly wealthy families there. I knew the perplexities many of these families underwent because they could get no competent help. I knew of a woman who had taken a situation in one of these families and was paid $200 per month. I knew also that this woman was not my equal in such a capacity, and that I could easily obtain such work and such wages, but I would not have it. I was certainly putting a very low valuation on my food in those days. I had never been hungry before, and really was not hungry then, or at least I was not conscious of being so. I have had bread and butter all my life, I said to myself, and bread and butter alone do not count for much just now. Unless my bread and butter can be made to feed a higher life than one occasioned by the drudgery I have done these 20 years, I do not want them. I cannot starve too soon. I wanted what I wanted, and I did not want anything else. I must have answered my own query as did the darky when asked where he was going. "What's a going? Is going where's I going? That's where I's going." At last I found a little newspaper that was worrying out a precarious existence by carrying many patent medicine advertisements, and here the editor gave me work at $6 a week. I asked him for $1 in advance, and only obtained it when I told him I had been 3 days without food. I worked for him faithfully, wrote for the paper, a 4-page weekly, and really secured a circulation of 500 or 600 subscribers for it. It had no regular subscribers when I commenced the work upon it, nothing but a home manufactured list kept up for the purpose of deceiving the postal authorities. When I had been working in the above capacity about 6 months and was beginning to outgrow the anxieties that formerly made life a terror to me, the paper died suddenly, and I was an orphan. The patent medicine men had withdrawn their patronage. I was surprised to find that the catastrophe did not overwhelm me. I was not nearly so frightened as I had been when I made my first move toward freedom. "Something else will come," I said, and I said it because I was beginning to feel within myself the power to command that something. And something else did come. It was a position on another paper at $10 a week. It did not last long, and again I was surprised to find myself quite indifferent and looking forward to something better yet. My march was steadily upward, and as I look back, I am aware that this was the case, because the external had to correspond with the internal me, and the internal me was constantly growing stronger. I was constantly growing more confident in myself, not in my luck, not in special providence or the overruling power of God, but in my own individual self. I was daring to think better of myself. I had formerly considered myself weak and others strong. I now looked upon myself as being stronger than I had ever imagined before, and there was not one particle of increase in my belief in self that did not record itself in the external conditions of my life. The more I believed I could do, the more I accomplished. I remember one morning, on awakening, it flashed through my brain that I was really a genius. The suggestion startled me. I was frightened for a moment. Then I sat up in bed and said to myself, I'm not going to refuse this suggestion. It has come unbidden, but it is mine. As I continued to think, I saw that everyone was a genius. That is, everybody had the power to develop out of himself, just as the leaves develop out of a tree, anything he wished to bring forth. The magnitude of the thought startled me, and yet I knew it was true then, quite as well as I know it now, after the confirmation of many years. That morning, I had indeed taken a splendid step. Let the reader ponder the last page of this chapter well, for it does literally, and in practical fact, furnish the key that unlocks the door of universal opulence to every soul that understands it. Man is a miniature world. He is the world condensed into a working form, and he really has the privilege of being what he wishes to be, of doing what he wishes to do. The only trouble being that he does not know his own power, does not know himself. Man, know thyself is the greatest injunction ever given. When a man knows himself, he knows the God toward whom his aspirations have always ascended. For a man's own ideal, the supreme creature he has the power to become is his God. God's power is believed to be limitless. It is limitless, and the fact that it is embodied in the man and expressed through his uses is no proof to the contrary. But to return to my personal affairs, I really had less anxiety in my new life than ever before. I need not tell how, little by little, I saved the money to bring my children to me. It is told somewhere else in my printed works. But I must tell that, even though I may have told it before, how the spirit of self-confidence that had lain dormant in me so long at last assumed proportions that made me question whether I wanted any position in any man's office any longer. Why could not I do something for myself? By this time, 2 or 3 years had passed. I had learned to write a good article and was making a reputation, which, though not extensive, was very valuable to me, since it produced for me a situation on a large Chicago paper where I had light work and excellent pay for a year or more. But this spirit of independence, which is self-growth, grew stronger in me all the time, as I trusted more and more the voice of the law of aspiration or desire, and followed where it led. I was tired of being somebody's hired man and longed to try my powers at work of my own. It used occasionally to happen that one of my editorials was condemned. This caused me to ask myself what right had the proprietor of the paper or anybody else to have my brain in his own power. He might well have his own power, the brains of those who do not object to such ownership, but with me it was different. My self-esteem had grown until I thought I could do as good work as the proprietor or anybody else. I am emphasizing the fact that with the growth of my self-esteem, there was a corresponding improvement in my circumstances. This has been the case since the hour I stood in the road of that old farm gate waiting for a wagon to pass. In other words, the thing you believe you can do. And if you will only be true to your belief, there is no power that can hinder you. The reason most men do not accomplish more is because they do not attempt more. But how are you to believe in your own power? You will have to affirm or declare a certain amount of faith in yourself, whether it is there or not, and then put that faith to the test by carrying it out in some external condition. Begin this way in small things and see them increase under your effort until you really do begin to feel the pride of self-conscious strength and individual mastery. Oh, the glory of the thing and the opulence that waits on such a frame of mind. But I will go on with the illustration of this idea by still further recounting my personal experiences. One dislikes to recount a circumstance that has already been written and published in some previous work, and I would not do what I am going to do were it not necessary to the illustration of the subject in hand. The same thing has already appeared in one of my books called A Search for Freedom. The study of self develops the lifting power in a man. It shows him his own growth and strength, and seeing his own strength, he reaches out and takes without any fear of refusal just what he wants. Accepting himself, there is no one to say no to him. But this reaching out to take possession of what he wants is no simple thought affair that loses itself in a succeeding troop of useless thoughts. It is thought armed with intelligent purpose and equipped for effort in the field of activities. There are plenty of visionary guides to wealth nowadays in which the writers tell you how, by holding certain thoughts, you can sit and do nothing while riches flow to you. There is nothing practical in this at this time, though the time may come when the thought will have such a power. But now the utmost that thought can do in this matter is to fill the person with vitality by showing him of what great things he is capable. It has been said, genius is only energy intensified, and energy is thought intensified and expressed in action. Thought shows a man that he does not have to be poor, that he does not have to ram stones in the street or hammer iron or dig ore or drive horses for a living. It shows him, moreover, that there is no compulsion on him to work in grooves that are distasteful to him. Why? Because he sees that his own mind is fertile and can catch out ideas that will expand and grow if he will only give them proper attention. He sees that he himself is as capable of arousing new hopes in the race and adding new uses to the operations of labor as any other man. But in order to accomplish anything, he must think. Thought is the beginning of effort. The person who works for others and plods steadily in a rut has no need for a thought. His boss thinks for him, and if this goes on long enough, all the grand possibilities of his brain shrivel up and die because of non-use. Capital needs and demands intelligent labor, men who think for themselves. Thought, original creative thought, will bring its reward by increased remuneration as you work for others while growing to strength sufficient to enable you to work for yourself, thus making room for someone not yet quite so strong as yourself. The slaves of capital are where they are, not because capital oppresses them, but because they will not use their brains. Employers everywhere honor the growing employee. No worthy man of money would hinder the growing mentality of the ambitious employee, but he could not if he would. Thought has power to redeem anyone by showing him a true estimate of his own worth, but so long as the so-called slaves of labor will not think, they can scarcely be called men. They are on a lower plane than that of men, and they are receiving treatment in conformity with the plane they are on. They have only their own ignorance to blame, and this is the thing they never think of blaming. I repeat, knowledge of self is the lifting power. It individualizes. No man can seek a knowledge of himself introspectively without discovering the rudiments of mighty effort within himself, as I did. It is this discovery that lifts one in the scale of being until he looks with level eyes into the eyes of all other men. When he is able to do this, his fetters, no matter what they may have been, actually fall. Better positions in business open up to him. Better surroundings come about him in answer to his increased consciousness of power. Let a man once proclaim himself a free man from his high point of intellectual seeing, and all the world hastens to respond. In first looking abroad over the world and seeing the inequality of position among the masses, we naturally resent it and begin to search for some person or persons on whom we may lay the blame. In California, where the capitalist flourished in extraordinary glory and where his tyranny was more felt than in any other state, owing to the fact that the mass of the laborers were the sons of the bravest men that the Republic ever produced, namely the pioneers who cut their way through such enormous obstacles to reach the land of gold in '49. There was the loudest possible call for sympathy and assistance from one so situated as I had been. I wanted somebody to blame for the situation, somebody besides the laborers themselves, and I became an acceptable writer to the agnostic press. I believed that certain social and political reforms were all that were necessary to enable men and women to rise in the scale of being, to much higher positions of thought and action than they had yet attained. And so I worked for the accomplishment of this end. That is, I did my little best for it. I was not widely known as a writer, and my influence was small, but I was in earnest and put my whole soul into the work, believing in it with great fervency. But at every step I was disappointed. The people themselves, for whom I was laboring, were the greatest disappointment of all. They were dead to any sense of power within themselves, and were only alive to what they considered their wrongs. No thoughts of a higher intellectual growth stimulated them in their efforts to obtain greater financial independence. Their ideas of liberty, if gratified, would lead in the direction of unbridled license. They knew nothing of freedom in the true sense of the word. They had no idea that their fetters were of their own making no less than of their masters, and were all to be resolved into one short sentence: complete ignorance of their own undeveloped possibilities. They would not institute within themselves the search for what they needed in order to secure liberty. They did not know, and seemingly did not wish to know, that each man holds his own heaven in his personality, and that the careful unfolding of that personality will yield him all that he can ever desire. They preferred the clashing of opinions that were not based upon the foundation where individual growth begins, but instead were the mixed outcome of life's mistaken beliefs. Instead of growing nearer to these people in sympathy, I was growing away from them. At first, I did not see the drift of the thing and made many futile attempts to regain my interest. I grew to hate the writing of a reform article. As to reading one from any of the numerous exchanges, I simply could not do it. I was on the wrong track, and intuition told me so, even in advance of reason. It would be difficult for me to describe the confusion of my mind I now fell into. My duties in the office of the paper on which I worked, though light, became a nightmare. The proprietor, the owner of the whole concern, was generosity itself. He was and is one of the noblest men I have ever met. My fast friend then and now, and if every soul on earth should prove a disappointment, the remembrance of him, his splendid manhood, his loyalty to his highest convictions of truth, and indeed his whole mentality, would always stand before me in the justification of my unshaken faith in the godhood of man. I am conscious now that this beloved friend was also losing faith in the reform for which he was laboring so faithfully. But at the time I left the paper, I did not know it. He was still putting every effort of his strong, great life into his work, regardless of the fact that those for whom he thought and labored and sacrificed were so irresponsive and unthankful. He left the paper later and has since applied his fine business ability to building up another enterprise which has been wonderfully successful. But when I left his paper, he was displeased. He had a right to think me ungrateful. My action must have looked so to him, but I could not remain in the work. It is true that I was incapable of analyzing the impulse which prompted me to abandon it. I only recognized the impulse, and because it was in the line of my growth, I was obedient to it. I had made many a little conquest over my beliefs in my own weakness, and I was strong for a woman who had begun her career in such a state of morbid self-depreciation. I had developed rapidly from the condition of fear that had once been normal, and was standing at what seemed the open doorway of my own character, where, looking within, I saw many plants of great promise and vigor, and wanted a chance to water them and dig about their roots, so that in time I should have much honest pride and comfort in them. I had come to think my work degrading to the higher possibilities of my brain, and although those possibilities were too vague to be clearly defined, they were apparent enough to hold every secret thought of my mind true to them. So I was almost recklessly obedient to the ideal constantly beckoning me forward. Chapter 3. The Dawn of Freedom. The morning came when, after dragging myself to the office, I sat at my desk, gloomy and despondent. I went presently to the proprietor's desk and told him that I wished to start a paper of my own. He told me the sea of journalism was very tempestuous, and many ships were wrecked on it. That of the few which succeeded, only a small number were real successes. he begged me for my own interest to remain where I was. When he saw that his argument failed to shake me, he turned back to his desk very gravely, and I felt that if I left his employment under these circumstances, I would lose the best friend I had in the world. On the road to progress, it often happens that the warmest friendship may become a tyranny that has to be broken. Nothing should hold the outward bound mind, and nothing could hold me. I would be free. What a compelling force is an ideal. And yet, on that November morning, I had no glimpse of the ideal that usually presented so many allurements for attracting me from sober duty. It was simply the fact that I had reached another stage of growth and must needs quit and look forward to the outlying filaments of the next experience that my developing life called for. I sat at my desk, deliberately reasoning out the situation. My dear friend, the editor, had spoken of my bread and butter as being involved in the new effort. I thought about this and was filled with resentment at the idea. It had frightened me often enough in the earlier part of my career, but it could frighten me no longer. I would not show it by the white feather. Bread and butter are all right when they can be made to serve the purpose of building my ideal, I thought, but not simply as a power with which to pump gas into another person's machine. I don't see what good this is doing me. This is one of these circumstances where my bread and butter, instead of feeding me, are really starving me. So that point in the discussion between me and myself fell dead, never to be resurrected again. As I write these words, I go back to that time, and I know now, while I only believed then, that the logic I used at that time is one of the truest bits of wisdom that a growing soul can adopt. I did really lose all fear of want as completely as if liberated from earth life and endued at that very moment with the highest angelic powers. I arose, put on my cloak and hood, and went down into the street. The morning had been sunshiny, but cold when I came. It was now gloomed over despairingly. I never saw a more dismal sky. The sleet, borne on strong wind, struck me in the face. The sidewalks were coated with ice. As I stood at the foot of the stairs, I opened my purse. I had only 25 cents. I had not a friend in the city but the one I had just left. I was my own sole dependence. There was no prop in the world on which I could lean, and I knew it with the most vivid sense of realization. More than this, I knew that there was no one I wanted to lean upon. I doubt whether in the history of the race there has been a soul who stood more erect in a position of such complete isolation. I was so far removed from fear and anxiety that I gloried in my aloneness. I walked those icy streets like a schoolboy just released from restraint. My years fell from me as completely as if death had turned my spirit loose in paradise. I returned to my boarding house to face the scowls of my landlord, whose prudent eye questioned my untimely return, and who shrewdly and rightly surmised that my next week's board bill would go unpaid. Then to my room and to pen and paper. I was fired by my sense of freedom, and what I wrote must have found an echo in hundreds of imprisoned spirits, for that article made my paper a success. Late in the afternoon, my landlord came in, embarrassed but resolute. He wanted to know how matters stood. "Have you been discharged by the chief?" "No, the chief has been discharged by me. I have refused to work for any person any longer." "Is your bread insured?" "I don't concede your right to question me, but I believe I am glad to take the liberty. My bread is insured." "How?" "I'm going to start a paper of my own, and it is already a success even before it is born. Sit down while I read you the first article I have written for it." He did so, and I read the article. The subject was I. It was an article to stir the blood. It awakened interest wherever it was read, and brought me in frank, noble contact with many minds. It was a declaration of individuality. It would have been a protest against bonds, but for the fact that it sounded notes of freedom far above all thoughts of bonds. It had wings to it. Those who read it were lifted into the air. That it had this effect on me was not surprising, but when I saw its effect on my landlord, I was amazed. His face, which was naturally sodden, had become illuminated, and for the moment actually beautiful. Oh, there is a man, a woman in every one of these shadows that walk the streets, if we could only reach them. After a pause, my landlord said, I have perfect confidence in your ability to succeed. In fact, I'm ready to gamble on you. I have $20,000 in bank, and you can draw on me for all you need. Then I confessed I was without means, but told him I confidently expected to reach the persimmon alone. I wouldn't take his money, but I asked him to wait a few weeks for my board. From that time on, no queen could have been treated with more courtesy. One day, in my absence, the landlord moved my things down from my single room on the 3rd floor to a lovely suite of 3 rooms on the parlor floor. Again and again, this generous man offered me money, which I steadily refused. Fate was working rapidly in my favor at that time. Evidently, the state of mental freedom I had achieved was putting a compulsion on externals in a very peremptory way. And oh, how happy I was! I drew the design for the heading of my paper and was so pleased with it that several times in the night I arose to look at it. I took it to the lithographer and had a plate made. It was sent to me by a boy several days after without the bill. When my writing was finished, I went to the largest publishing house in the city and ordered 20,000 copies of the paper to be delivered at my room on a certain day. In the meantime, I was addressing wrappers as fast as I could and making other preparations for mailing sample copies. At that time, there was no trouble in getting thousands of sample copies into the mail. Things have changed since then. On the 3rd day after my papers were mailed, I received $11 on subscription. I told the landlord, and we danced around the table until we knocked off the ink bottle and so left a lasting impression of our joy. The next day brought more. Not long afterwards, a rich man in Boston sent me $250. Others sent considerable and smaller sums. Altogether, I felt that I could afford to pay my good friend, the landlord. But no, let me alone, he said. I had need for you to owe me for your board during the time of your trial. I'm trying to get the Lord in debt to me. It is my only hope of salvation. This was the beginning of my working for myself. It was the end of my working for wages. My freedom really dated from the day when, standing out in that snow and counting the capital I had to begin life on, I found my inventory showed a total of 25 cents. All along, as I advanced one step after another, I was inclined to examine the relations of my mind or state of thought to matter or external conditions. The result was I came to have a knowledge of the law of attraction and how to use it in a way to benefit myself and others. Experience has been the only teacher of my consequence I have ever had, and if I had not utilized the reasoning faculties that invited me to submit my experiences to the test of the most critical thought, I am sure I should never have found the right relation between the mind itself as expressed in thought and the same mind as carried out on the external plane and expressed in uses, in which case I should never have been able to tell my readers how they may command the wealth they need. Some of our scientists who have at last found what they deserved to find earlier in their lives, that is, recognition of their own tremendous worth from the people, are now speaking boldly and understandingly of what they call the correlation of forces. I was delighted when I first heard of this expression, the correlation of forces. I had found that thought was a force and bore a direct relation to the thing it was centered upon. I began to experiment with it. Before long, I received the absolute assurance that a man is as he believes. That is, the thoughts in which he believes creates his body and his external conditions also. No man not versed in mental science can conceive how much the above statement rests upon the Bible for proof. The characters in the Bible did what they believed they could do. Where doubt of their own ability to do the thing crept in, their faith was overshadowed and failure resulted. After much thought, I came to the conclusion that a man was worth his own valuation, provided that valuation was based on a dispassionate, logical examination of himself from the standpoint of pure reason. The reason that rests on a knowledge of man's place in the universe and of how he came to be where he is. Man must use his brain constantly. He needs to compare himself not only with other men, but with other creatures and things, in order to recognize his advantage over all of them. He must know for a fact that nothing masters him, that he masters all things, not only of the present, but of the future as well. He must look forward to see the splendor of those intellectual gleams shooting beyond his experiences and illuminating many an untried vista. What? Does a sense of superiority actually lift a person in the scale of being? It surely does, for the reason that a man's body is his conscious intelligence, and it is because his body is his conscious intelligence that he is what he believes himself to be. In other words, a man is as he believes. Chapter 4. Arrival at the conscious plane of growth. I had now arrived at the conscious plane of growth, little dreaming, even after coming to an understanding of the law, that it meant for me the immense fortifications of strength which it has proved. I did not dream that it meant the conquest of disease, not only for myself but for others. The name of C.C. Post has gone out to the world as an author and a clear and logical thinker in all the new lines of thought. When we were married, some 16 years ago, we were both poor enough, but both of us had learned to think entirely beyond the present standard of thought. We took a complete course of lessons in Christian Science, and it did us an immense good, by way of showing us the wrong end of the road to which the high ideal of our minds was constantly pointing. The wrong end of the road predicates the right end. They say all roads lead to Rome. This is true. In our case, even the wrong road directed us aright. We were on that road and we had to think about it. This was the one thing necessary. Anybody can unravel the mysteries of the whole span of life, can do anything on earth he wants to do, can learn anything he wants to learn, can command the power that created worlds if he will only think. It was at this time that I began to think more earnestly than ever before. I plunged into the remarkable assertion of Christian Science that there is nothing in all the universe but nothing, and that the one duty of the individual is to get rid of his individuality and lose himself in nothingness. I came out of my plunge with the knowledge that this idea was not only unsound, but that the direct reverse of it was true. Individuality then became my great theme, the mighty and unfailing power vested in the individual, the creative power existing in the man. When I had come fully into this idea, I could feel the chains break and fall from me. It even took a pressure off my lungs, so that my breathing was deeper from that hour. I also observed that every advancement I made in thinking showed forth in some new improvement in my body. Thought is all powerful, by which I mean the thought you apply to yourself when discouraged makes you weak, plants weakness in your body, renders you unfit for action, and destroys your courage, even your ability to advance along any line of intelligent development. But you do not have to think weak thoughts of yourself, and you no sooner begin to affirm this fact than you observe a change. You want to hold long conversations with yourself in which you affirm that you are capable of thinking well of yourself and have the right to do so. Say, I can and I will, and let the meaning of these words permeate every particle of you. Very soon you will be stronger and better calculated to undertake some good, paying enterprise. Money comes through doing, but underneath the doing lies the mighty motor, thought, the finest, the most powerful, the most expansive, and the most creative substance there is. Thought is the world builder, but it has to build man first, and then the man builds the world. From that day in November, when I stood on the sleety pavement in Chicago with 25 cents in my purse, but with quite a palpable wings in my brain, I have never really feared poverty. I did not make a fortune out of my paper, but I built it into a very fair business, which supplemented my husband's salary so that we lived comfortably, if not luxuriously. But Mr. Post was taken sick. He sank rapidly into consumption and touched the verge of the grave before we had learned to use the power of thought with sufficient intelligence to bring him back to health. It was an awful thing to sit there helplessly and see that rare and beautiful life drift away. How hard I tried to put in practice the lessons I had learned in Christian Science. I could do nothing with them except to weaken him still more. At last I resolved that I would not let him die. I spoke the word of health for him, and spoke it so powerfully that it was like planting a monument in a substance so inflexible that nothing could shake it. I saw that monument constantly, and it gave me strength until I became as a god and knew that no power could come against me. It was at this time that the right road was pointed out to me by the discovery of the wrong road. It was here that the errors of Christian Science were made apparent. In that hour of rebellion against conditions which threatened to destroy a life that was dear to me, when intuition told me that by trusting my own thought, I could save him. In that hour, when I dared to think for myself thoughts which were in advance of the school whose disciple I had become and from which I had hoped so much but was disappointed, in that hour of courage and self-trust was born the movement now known throughout the world as mental science. From an air plant of Christian Science, I had ripened into the fruitage of realistic idealism, and I dared to trust to that which told me another page of the infinite scroll of truth had been unfolded to me, not alone for me, but through me for all mankind. I not only dared to trust these thoughts, but together we proceeded a little later to put them into practical execution by formulating the truths made known to me. Mr. Post began to get well, and he kept on getting well, but he had lost his editorial position, our principal means of support. I had sold my paper to get money to enable him to go south, so that we were faced by what to some would have seemed a very grim phantom indeed. For a time I felt almost impatient. I had held the fort against death and had scored a splendid victory, but here we were without money, stung by small wants daily and not knowing where to turn. It had been easier to fight the giant and gain the victory than to banish a horde of small annoyances like flies or mosquitoes. Necessity is often the mother of invention, and one day Mr. Post suggested that I write a set of lessons on mental science. The name we had decided to give this child of mental growth. We little dreamed then that this child would grow into a giant with a world-wide influence. But we had faith and dared to do. With my very soul on fire, I began to write the lessons. When they were completed, there was no money to pay for printing them. So in the paper I had formerly owned, I advertised to the effect that the student could take one lesson at a time, copy and return it. My daughter, Mrs. Powers, helped me prepare 6 copies of each of the lessons, and we really thought we were all well equipped. There were only 6 lessons in the course, and I sold the entire set to copy and return for $25. Some days later, I received several letters asking questions about the lessons. One letter contained an order for $25. I had hard work to keep this money from looking large, but I managed it and fixed up my expectations for more. And more came, a great deal more, and it continues to come. Of all the positive demands I have made, there has never been one which I have insisted more unflinchingly than that one concerning money matters. Some annoyances about other things would and it did come, for the fortification of self was not guarded in every direction. But there has been no weakening about money. It was essential to my freedom that I should have it. There was nothing in all the world to prevent me from having it, since I had so much to give in return. I had argued myself into a state of mental strength where I felt my mastery concerning it. So has everyone plenty to give in return by simply unfolding his own self. His demand can be made just as emphatic. I am sure that even now, after so many years of financial success, I could lose my power and drift back into poverty-stricken conditions if I should permit my efforts to become clouded by fear. Fear is the only thing of which we should be afraid. It is the only real, live devil. All others are dead. So, Now, the one great denial of my life is that of fear. I am not afraid of poverty. I will not pinch down in my money spending. I will not economize, as to that word is commonly understood. This is my constant affirmation. It is not economy to acknowledge limitations to creative thought. I will live my life and not die all the way through it. I am greater than money and 1,000 times more positive. In the nature of things, it is for me to command and it to obey. This is the law whose mandate is absolutely unchangeable. He who trusts the law can come into the health of the law and the opulence of the law, an opulence which nothing but the man himself can stint. Chapter 5. Practical Fruitage of the Conscience Plane. It was in consequence of Mr. Post's illness that we left Chicago and went to Georgia, he having gone in advance of myself and before I had come to a full understanding of my power to heal. While there, we built a beautiful home with a large grounds and many trees and flowers. It was really a stately residence, but I never quite liked the location of it, and we sold it and came further south. The first winter we spent in Daytona, on the opposite side of the Halifax River from where we now live. We bought land on the peninsula side and had the scrub palmetto roots grubbed out of the ground before we could do anything with it. The soil was absolutely virgin. The first house we put up was a beautiful little cottage of 3 rooms under a group of stately palms by the river. This was the first home we lived in after we came. Then, as others wished to come, we put up one wing of the Colonnades Hotel, then another wing, making quite a large house. Now another section of the building has been built with an additional 50 rooms. 2 beautiful boulevards reaching across the peninsula from river to ocean, lined on both sides with stately palm trees and paved with shells, constitute handsome and attractive avenues for the comfort and convenience of pedestrians, carriages, and bicycle riders. There are 4 other boulevards with many intersecting avenues laid out, some of them partly improved. We built a number of pretty cottages of different styles and sizes, and a large store building, the upper part of which is devoted to our publishing business, and the place is gradually assuming the appearance of a town. In short, from the small starting point of those first lessons, a large business has grown, a business that never would have grown but for the fact that we coached our self-system along until we conquered fear and came out under the full sail of mastery. You who read this will probably say, "Oh, yes, but C.C. Post and Helen Wilmans Post are not like the majority of people. They had capital in their brains and some essential traits of character not possessed by everybody." Now, I'm going to deny my part of this charge completely. I have never met with a living soul whose nature was to shrink from the world and be crushed by its opinions to the same degree that I have been. I have looked upon other people as gods, while at the same time I seemed to know that I was nobody. Yet I must say that deep down below all the crushed heart of me, I felt a confident sense of hope when I was alone and away from disturbing influences. I suppose I did actually, at such times, touch that principle of individualism that cannot do otherwise than speak for itself when uncovered. I could feel it. It was good company for me, and I was glad to be alone with it. I tried to cultivate it, and I know now that it was my savior. There is not a person of ordinary intelligence alive who does not understand and thoroughly respond to the sentence just written. Every soul has found that he could strengthen himself by going down within himself and coming into contact with the strange bulwark of the true and undisturbed self that exists there. Everyone, to a certain degree, has felt the shrinking of which I have spoken, though I hope no one has been made so wretched by it as I have been for hours and days at a time. I wonder now at the persistence which I endeavored to do something that would yield me the comfort of feeling myself a success, even in the smallest matters. Several years ago, when I tried magazine writing, I do believe I wrote more than 100 articles that were refused. How could I keep up the effort so constantly when I dreaded the results so greatly? I would actually tremble when those big brown envelopes were handed back to me, and a feeling of disgrace almost overpowered me. I'm telling this for the purpose of showing my reader how, with my growing determination, I made myself over as the years went on. I conquered slowly but surely. From the opinion of myself, which constituted my weakness, I grew into another opinion which became my strength. Out of the limp rag of negation that I was, I literally made myself into a creature of sufficiently positive to put a compulsion on the selfsame environment that had previously held me in compulsion. I know that if I could do this with everything in the world against me, others can do it. It is no miraculous task to make ourselves over. Thought can do it. Thought patiently held to and always true to the leading desire. And now as I look about me upon this little city by the sea, literally created by the power of our thought expressed in courageous action, as I stop to survey our splendid possessions and realize that all this change from poverty to opulence has taken place in the past few years, and only since I came to the conscious plane of growth. As I think of all this and then try to contemplate the boundless possibilities of the future, and then compare my present environment with that of millions who are toiling now as I toiled so long in ignorance of their own powers, I wish, and I know that this desire is a prophecy of its fulfillment, that all men and all women may come to an understanding of themselves, and by reason of that knowledge break the chains which bind them in the slavery of poverty. Chapter 6. The Potency of Desire. My own experience confirms the fact that the desires toward which I have been most unflinchingly persistent have been the first to manifest objectively. Take, for instance, my desire for financial success. When I came into mental science, I found that this was my leading desire. To be sure, I had many other desires that were very imperative. I desired youth and its symbols, health and its accompanying results, but I really desired money more than anything else. Why? Because I had been under the pressure of poverty so long that money represented a certain face of freedom to me, without which no amount of health, strength, or beauty could be enjoyed to any great extent. In other words, money did at that time promise a greater measure of freedom for my thoughts and for my body also than any other thing. Therefore, the desire for money was my leading desire. I was a slave for the lack of it. Every thought of my life was chained to it and could not escape. How could my spirit, thought life, try its wings in the clearer atmosphere of the ideal under such circumstances? I remember as if it had been just yesterday, the very hour when I paused in my work and in my thinking and made a compact with myself, something like this: I will have money first of all. Without money, I cannot move a step in the discovery of the mighty power latent in the human brain. This thing must go as I direct it, and I will submit no dictation from any external source. I spoke these words aloud, and they never have wavered in their force. In speaking them, I created power in that line which went forth to its own accomplishment. Looking down within myself, I came across the mental record of these words, and they seemed absolutely invulnerable, a sort of impregnable fortress that nothing could disrupt or weaken. The record of other resolutions faded or weakened at different times, but this never did. I had borne poverty until I simply would not bear it any longer. Disease, old age, and death might come, but not poverty. It had been the monster which held the best part of my intellect in dreadful bondage, and I was done with it all at all hazards. This resolution received the emphasis of every atom of my body and mind, and no power on earth could break it down. No power on earth or in heaven ever does break down such a resolution. There was no wavering in it. There was no God willing in it. There was no if it is for the best in it. It was clear-cut positiveness, unblurred by a single flaw of irresolution. It had reached a point in mental suffering where life was not worth a straw to me unless I could have it on my own terms. So I stood up before the powers that be and made a statement of my terms. There was nothing to reject them, a thing I did not know at that time. So the statement stood for all there was in it, and it is standing yet. As for my other desires, I have never come into so forceful a position with regard to them. I have been satisfied to see my health gradually improve and my mental powers gradually strengthen, and I have this same feeling yet about them. I can wait the slow developments of time. With poverty, however, I could not wait. I would not. And I did not. For my resolution acted like the magician's wand, and efforts which I had put forth long before rushed suddenly into success. Money enough came to release my thoughts from the eternal dollar and to banish my fear of poverty. I did not want very much because it easily becomes a burden and enslaves the higher thought quite as much as its absence. What I wanted was freedom, and that was what I realized. It is an inconsistent thing, while all growth is through accumulation, that society should place a ban upon the accumulation of wealth. Wealth is as necessary to our existence as the air we breathe. It is true that while we can manage to drag out meager or stinted lives without much wealth, still the lives we live are not in any way the lives we desire. We find ourselves in positions where our aspirations are shorn of their ascending power. Our conditions does indeed become sordid, simply because our faculties, so grand in their possibilities of expression, are tied down to a contemplation of the source from which our next meal is to come. There is nothing that can belittle a human brain so rapidly as this, nothing that can confine it to the contemplation of things unworthy of its scope, nothing that so soon will lead it into those mistakes which the world punishes as sins. Why not abandon the effort on the brute plane? It is on the brute plane alone where the efforts to accumulate seems sordid, and study the law of accumulation. There is a law that governs it, and he who knows the law well enough to practice it has put poverty under his feet forever. When I tell people this, they say, "Oh, if I could only put poverty under my feet, what would I not give?" They do not say, "Oh, if I could only understand the law." Scarcely one of them cares for the law. They want the results of understanding it while they remain indifferent to it. This is not a state of mind where anything valuable comes. The first thing to want is an understanding of the law. Give us wisdom is the first demand, and in fact it is the only one. With wisdom, all other things flow in. Without wisdom, that is, without an understanding of the law, there is no successful accumulation. There may be a spasmodic power to accumulate, but it is never to be relied upon. It may desert one at any hour, and it always deserts sometime. But the power to accumulate under a knowledge of the law of attraction never fails in even the smallest particular. I am just as much assured of wealth today as if I had millions under lock and key. Why? Because I understand the law by which our wants are supplied. What? Are you operating this mighty law, you ask? Yes, I am operating it every day. I am building houses with it and operating it in improvements of use and beauty. I am accumulating wealth just as fast as I use it. If it seemed necessary to use it faster, it would come to me faster. People have said to me, "Why don't you put your money out at interest?" My answer to this question is ready. To put money out on interest would clearly indicate that I have more confidence in money than in the power of the law that brings it to me. It is a position that would wreck me. It is not my business to think of money except as one thinks of a tool with which to work. My business is to constantly seek a greater knowledge of my own power under the law. For it is this knowledge alone that brings money. To put your trust in money is a sordid thing, and it brings its own reward in disappointed hopes. But to put your trust in yourself, knowing your relation to the law, will actually put you in the way of accumulating everything that is necessary to make you a free man. Let me not mislead any of my readers. The power of which I speak under the law performs no miracles, but works itself out through the ordinary means lying thick about you. This power is simply a revelation to you of your own mastery. It gives you wisdom to carry your own faculties into external expression, and in doing this to obtain the reward that waits upon the doing. A knowledge of the law of attraction ingrained within you will give you the power to carry any ideas of your own into practical success. Are you a drummer? Then you can sell twice as many goods as you could before you understood the law. Are you a mechanic? It is in this department above all others that it reveals its might. It develops your constructiveness from one point to another until you see that there is no limit on this line. Are you a lawyer, a singer, an artist? It makes no difference what you are or what you desire to be. It is in this field of your operations that a knowledge of the law of attraction, as revealed by a study of mental science, will enable you to succeed. This knowledge of the law is something that can be learned easily and more inexpensively than the medical student learns his textbooks and masters the secrets of human organism. Many persons have declared that it can be learned more easily than this. Others have said that by following the Spirit, a man would come into knowledge of it. But this is nonsense. The knowledge of this mighty thing requires intellectual application of the closest kind, and time for the mental ripening of the many facts it has to impart. Of course, a slight knowledge of these facts will give the student some power in conquering the impediments that beset his path. Perfect conquest requires perfect knowledge. And there are no men, and no gods, who can jump into this position at one bound. It requires work, study, and a testing of the knowledge as it slowly matures in the mind. But suppose it does require a long time and unflagging effort. What is there in all the world so worthy of it? What else is there that bestows power to create in every direction and in every field of thought and action? I, who write these thoughts, am absolutely fearless. Neither time nor circumstance has any terrors for me. Poverty shakes his skeleton wand at me without producing a tremor. I am his master, not because I have houses and money in banks, but because I have the self-confidence, fully tested, that enables me to evolve the positive thought and to speak the positive word which externalizes my demand. Chapter 7. Correlation of thought to external things. There's nothing truer than the quality of thought which we entertain correlates certain externals in the outside world. This is the law from which there is no escape, and it is the law. This correlation of the thought with its object, that from time immemorial has led the people to believe in special providence. A man believes he is led by providence in a certain direction. The direction is not of his own choosing, so far as his consciousness is concerned, but providence had nothing to do with it. There was that in the man, unrecognized by himself, which related him to something or some condition on the external plane, and under the law of correlation, he went in that direction. Every thought a man can have relates him to some external thing and draws him in that direction of it. This fact, on the plane where the thoughts of men are fleeing and of no comparative importance, has too frail an effect upon external life to be noticeable. But when much thought has been given to one subject, the result cannot be other than the observable. Thus, continued thought upon disease allies us with the external conditions related to disease, or more correctly speaking, it creates the disease. Thought on the subject of sin allies us with so-called sins and renders us self-accusing and accusers of others. While the belief that there is no sin, that the sins of the people are only the mistakes of an unripe and ignorant race, destroys the accusing spirit within us, so that we see ourselves and others in a nobler light, and thus bring in a condition of peace and harmony. A belief in poverty not only burdens and oppresses us until it makes us mentally poor, but it allies us with poverty-stricken conditions. Thought not only allies us with certain external things that represent its own character, but when we have ascended from the physical to mental, which is a result of the study of mental science, it becomes creative. This is a marvelous thing. But if I know anything in the world, I know it is true. What? Can a person by holding certain thoughts create wealth? Yes, he can. A man by holding certain thoughts, if he knows the law that relates effect and cause on mental plane, can actually create wealth by character of the thoughts he entertains. And this creation must, at this time, be supplemented by courageous action, intensified by creative thought and knowledge of self. But such action is only a part of the thought. This law is easy to understand if one will only take the pains to investigate it. Now, I want to write something practical on this subject, and it seemed hard to do because the very people I most desire to reach are those who have less faith in the power of mind to control matter than any other class. It seems that they will not believe, and until they do interest themselves in this wonderful subject enough to investigate its underlying principles, I do not know how I can persuade them to believe. Well, I cannot now enter extensively into the truths of mental science, except the phases especially bearing upon poverty. Yet I believe that many who read this little book will thereby discover the road to the truth. There is an almost universal reaching out for money. This reaching out is from the acquisitive faculties only, and its operations are confined to the competitive realm of the business world. It is a purely external proceeding. Its mode of action is not rooted in the knowledge of the inner life, with its finer, more just, and spiritualized wants. It is but an extension of animality into the realm of the human, and no power can lift it to the divine plane the race is now approaching. For all lifting on this plane is the result of spiritual growth. It is doing just what Christ said we must do in order to be rich. It is first seeking the kingdom of heaven within, where alone it exists. After this kingdom is discovered, then all these things, external wealth, shall be added. What is there within a man that can be called the kingdom of heaven? When I answer this question, not one reader out of 10 will believe me. So utterly bankrupt of knowledge of their own internal wealth are the great majority of people. But I shall answer it, nevertheless, and it will be answered truly. Heaven exists within us in the faculties latent in the human brain, the superabundance of which no man has ever dreamed. The weakest man living has the powers of a God folded within his organization, and they will remain folded until he learns to believe in their existence, and then tries to develop them. Men generally are not introspective, and this is why they are not rich. They are poverty-stricken in their own opinions of themselves and their powers, and they put the stamp of their own belief on everything they come in contact with. If a day laborer, let us say, does but look within himself long enough to perceive that he has an intellect that can be made as great and far-reaching as that of the man he serves for a pittance that keeps body and soul together, if he sees this and attaches due importance to it, the mere fact of his seeing it has, to a degree, loosened his bonds and brought him face to face with better conditions. But there is wanted something more than the fact of knowing that he is, or may become, by recognition of self, his employer's intellectual equal. There remains the fact that he needs also to know the law and claim its provisions, namely that his superior knowing relates him to a superior position. He must know this and trust it, for it is by holding this truth in faith and trust that he begins to ascend bodily. I would not be understood to advise blind bigotry. Far be it from my wish to incite unpleasant relations between employer and employee. Employers everywhere hail with delight the acquisition of employees who are not mere machines. They want brains in their business and are glad to pay for them. Cheap help is often the most expensive, in the sense of being the least profitable. As brain growth or development of thought power in the employee increases his value to the employer, and as the employee grows to the degree of strength where he is capable of doing for himself, there will be another not yet grown so strong to take his place. The gradual recognition by a man of his own latent powers is the heaven within that is to be brought forward into the world and established in these conditions which correlate it. I have never taken a single step upward in the external world that was not the direct result of my recognition of some new power within my own brain. I have never sought wealth at all. I have simply sought to know myself. I have believed in my own greatness and in your greatness equally. I have denied that man was a creeping worm of the dust. I have seen him as the seed of germ of all attainment. I place no limitation upon his powers of progression. I scorn the word impossible as applied to what is in his power to be and to do. I think of his vast ability and my own with a jubilant feeling of surpassing triumph. I regard it as an assurance of present as well as prospective greatness and a guarantee eventually of absolute mastery over all things and conditions which once mastered me. This frame of mind is well represented by the word opulent, and in the direct measure of the power I have in holding it up before my perception, just in that measure is my business successful. Let me lose sight of this opulence of mental seeing, and my business declines. The most faithful and critical observation of this thing for several years has demonstrated its truth to a certainty. From this fact, I deduce the following literal truths. A mental poorhouse projects from itself the spirit of a visible poorhouse, and this spirit expresses itself in visible externals correlated to its character. A mental palace sends forth the spirit of a visible palace with results that correlate it, and the same may be said of sickness and sin, of health and goodness. But how is it possible for the man who is out of work and who sees his children in rags and crying for bread to conform to the conditions required? How can he perceive opulence when nothing but squalor meets his eyes? How can he calm his soul and enter into it by introspection, and there to discover the mental wealth that the world has denied him a right to since birth? He does not dream that he is anything but one of the lowest and most unfortunate of beings. He sees nothing within himself that yields him a single hope. What can such a man do? He can do nothing but conform to the law, either on its negative or positive plane. He can recognize his manhood and his rights, the dignity of human nature, and the godlike character of his own undying intellect, and be thereby raised in the scale of being. Or he can fail to do this and be crushed out of life. More work and more money will relieve his present need and furnish him with implements for prolonging his existence. But no amount of money will give him that inner opulence, which is the sure foundation for unchanging wealth. That opulence which is the purse of Fortunatus, and which can never be exhausted. Mental wealth, which is the recognition of innate ability, is the only true root of external wealth. External wealth that has not this root is but floating air plant. There is no dependence to be placed in it. A great many Christian and mental scientists say to me, "Why, I treat myself for success and for money nearly all the time." I resolutely refrain from holding thoughts of poverty, and I keep mental pictures of opulence before me with unvarying zeal. Yet I am always poor. How is it the rule will not work for me? I answer such a one in this way. I say to him or her, "It is quite obvious from your statement that you are not seeking the kingdom of heaven within, but the externals of it without. Seek it first within. Give no thought to the externals at all. They will group themselves around the internal kingdom when you have found it. Treat yourself for a knowledge of truth. Treat yourself for the wisdom that will disclose and develop within your own brain the source of all power. Giving no heed to the external, and the external will manifest itself in wealth. It will manifest itself in the production of creative thought which will seek expression in noble, courageous action. You will begin to trust the voice of aspiration and are to follow where it bids you. Many people think that to seek religion as it is taught by the creeds is to seek the kingdom within. But this is not so. Do the creeds teach the opulence of man's innate capacity? Do they teach that the infinite spirit of strength and health and intelligence and beauty and power, which they call God, is in man? No. They teach just the opposite. They teach man that he is nothing, and that any good that he may perceive in himself is not of himself, but of an outside God. They teach him that he is the most poverty-stricken wretch in life, that he is destitute of all merit, that he deserves nothing. Of all the poor houses ever created in the mental realm, there are none so utterly poverty-stricken as that which the creeds have erected. Did Jesus, their master, teach this way? No, he did not. He knew that opulence existed in infinite diffusion. He knew the law by which man's innate mental opulence correlated him to the external opulence, and he taught it. Did he not say, "Consider the lilies of the field, they toil not, neither do they spin"? Yet Solomon, in all his glory, was not arrayed like one of these. What did this mean? It meant that the lily from its inner source of opulence simply expressed itself on the external plane. It is a tremendous lesson. The lily, not doubting its own beauty, simply holding true to its sense of the beautiful, which was innate in it, expressed itself. What men express themselves? Very few. And why? Because they do not know themselves. And not knowing themselves, how can they worthily express themselves in noble and courageous action, which is but thought and execution? They express the beggars they think they are, and their expression of themselves is correlated to the shreds and patches that form the beggar's surroundings. For 20 years I've been telling men how rich they are. I have been looking at their undeveloped intellectual resources and searching them for new manifestations of genius ever since I can remember. I have seen them great and glorious, even when they looked upon themselves as pygmies. I have stood sponsor for the self-esteem of my friends and helped to develop that special bump from a hole in the cranium to a decided protuberance. I was called the liberator because I could see so much more in the other people than they could see in themselves. And this power of seeing does not liberate the latent faculty in its structure and start it on its endless road to all growth. My husband used to say that my judgment of people was goggle-eyed. I had a little daughter whose judgment was also goggle-eyed. She too saw men as trees walking. One day her father reprimanded her severely for her exaggerations. She had been playing with some urchins on the street and had transformed them into angels. After her scolding, she sat in her baby chair in a meditative mood, watching her father with an expression of motherly interest in her face, not unmixed with pity. She had been in a picture gallery a few days before and had observed the unusual arrangement of the windows. Presently, she lifted a dimpled cheek out of a dimpled hand and said gently and encouragingly, "Papa, you're the dudest old thing whatever lived, but your head ain't got no skylight in it." It was a fact. His head had no window that opened upward. He lived in the city of Mon, in that state of groan. There was enough of natural opulence in him to have turned the desert of his surroundings into paradise, but he could not see it, and we who, from the nature of the case, had to look through his eyes were awfully impoverished by his mental seeing. Join me at the next video as we continue with the reading of the book titled The Conquest of Poverty by Helen Wilmans. If you haven't done so, please do hit the like button, share this with your friends, leave me a comment to let me know that you were here. And I think that that's how it's going to have to happen. It's like one mind at a time, one person making the decision that this is not a collective reality that we would like for the human race moving forward. And hey, yeah, subscribe to the channel.